Minister of Local Government and Modernization, Mr. Nikolai Astrup. I have practiced to pronounce well today the names of the Norwegians, so I hope it's going to work well. Chair of the County Government of Vinken, Tonia Breana. Deputy Secretary General, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lamia Kamal-Shawi, and I am the Director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities.
Yeah.
I think some people are talking at the same time. I will ask people, please, to mute their microphone, please. So I was saying that I'm the Director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities at the OECD, and I will be the moderator for this opening session. I'm really delighted to open this third OECD Roundtable on Cities and Regions for the SDGs, which will focus on long-term recovery strategy from COVID-19. Before I begin, I wanted to flag a few housekeeping matters. We are recording the roundtable. I think you received this signal now already, which will be made available on our webpage later this week. This is a Zoom webinar format, hence not everybody can take the floor, and we invite you to use the Q&A function to share your thought. Yes. I have a problem that everything is blocked at the same time. So I don't know what is going on. Anyway, I will try to do my best. You can use the chat function to contact our support team for any technical difficulty you may experience. I think, Aziza, we have more than 7 registered participants, and we wish this roundtable to be as interactive as possible. So we will use a lot of interactive tools to engage with you over the next 2 days. Please feel free to engage with us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at OECD_local using the hashtag SDGs. And if you want more background on our work on localizing the SDGs, I encourage you to visit the program webpage, the pilot report, and our web tool that the team is putting in the chat. So let me start by thanking the County of Vinken, Norway, the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization, and the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities for the remarkable work we have done together over the past 2 years, and also for co-hosting this roundtable. This third roundtable takes place during one of the world's greatest crises, a crisis that affects all of us, every country, every regions, cities and community, a health crisis that threatens our lives, a social crisis that distances us from our loved ones, our neighborhood and our friends, and an economic crisis that threatens our jobs. In this time, the SDGs are more relevant than ever. They focus on all the 3 domains, and they provide a guide to help us design and policy response to build back better. To help cities, regions, and countries achieve the SDGs by 2030, the roundtable today has 3 main objectives. One is to accelerate progress in this decade of action toward 2030 through learning from front runners that succeed in localizing the SDGs, to share the findings from 3 new OECD reports on a territorial approach to the SDGs in Flanders, Southern Denmark, and Viken, and to discuss how to best coordinate ongoing effort to prepare voluntary local reviews alongside national reviews to strengthen our approach to the SDGs. So tomorrow, the roundtable will focus on long-term recovery from COVID-19, and we will consider the role of a territorial approach to the SDGs can play in helping cities, regions, and countries build back better. We will also discuss how the SDG can help cities and regions shape and implement COVID-19 recovery strategies by sharing lessons and showcasing successful experiences. I will stop here, and I will leave the floor to the chair of the County Government of Viken, Mrs. Tonia Breana, for her opening remarks. Tonia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lamia, and it's my great pleasure on behalf of Viken County to welcome you all to the third roundtable of the OECD project, A Territorial Approach to the SDGs. As a co-host We would love for you all to come and visit us and see our beautiful county and country, but unfortunately, it is not possible under the current circumstances. Nevertheless, we are very happy with the program and the arena the OECD has set up, and proud to have been a part of planning this event. As everywhere else in the world right now, Norway has experienced a significant increase in the spread of COVID-19 in the recent weeks. For all of us, this challenging situation works as a backdrop everywhere for everything we do, but our work in the SDGs and the work with the SDGs being no exception. Rather, the pandemic highlights the urgency and importance to sustainable change, and we are working forward to tomorrow's discussion on this topic. Viken is a new county. We have only existed as an organization since January the 1st, 2020. But we are proud and a product of a national regional reform where 3 former counties were made into one. As all of you have experienced, this year has not been exactly what we imagined or planned for. And we have to make many changes in our plans for our first year. However, we have not wavered in our decision to the Sustainable Development Goals. Already in 2018, even before we were our own county, while working with the setting up of the groundwork for our new county, we made the decision to put the SDGs as a foundation for everything we do in Viken. This decision has been repeated and underlined by both the elected county government and the county council, and we are building it into the fabric of our organization and into our policies. Being a pilot in a territorial approach to the SDGs and cooperating and learning from the OECD and the other pilots has been a great support for us to build knowledge and to explore what the SDGs means to us in our Norwegian regional Viken context. We have gotten an understanding that there are regions and local communities all over the world dedicated to the same causes as us and encountering many of the same obstacles. Through this, we have made 3 main observations that give direction to our work on the SDGs. The first is that in order to meet with the SDGs, we must take a holistic approach, seeing the different SDGs in relation to each other, exploring possible synergies and trade-offs. We cannot risk taking measures to meet one goal only for it to have negative effects on others. This understanding must be created across all sectors and parts of our organization. Our focus is often on one specific topic, but we must always work towards meeting all of the SDGs, whether we work in education, infrastructure, business development, with the environment, procurement, or human resources. There will be conflicts between goals and difficult choices to be made, but we must take them consciously. This also makes multi-level dialogue and cooperation essential. The national, regional, and local levels have different responsibilities and tools that can be mobilized to reach the SDGs. We must make sure this complement and support each other. This is also true for our cooperation with the private and voluntary sector and with the initiatives of individuals in our local communities. This brings us over to our second observation. Nobody can yet claim to have reached the SDGs, and nobody wins it unless everybody wins. There is no blueprint or one perfect solution for succeeding. Our circumstances are different. Our resources and challenges, our strengths and weaknesses are different. We can learn from each other and give advice, but we must accept that there are different approaches both between our organizations and within them. It is imperative that we find ways of working with the SDGs that make sense to us in our day-to-day work, so we can take partial action. Our third observation is that the time is over where all dimensions of sustainability have equal weight. We are in a global crisis with climate change and diminishing biodiversity. If we destroy our own living conditions on this planet, all other things that are important to us will be irrelevant. This does not mean that social and economical goals are not important or that they should have not been taken into consideration. It means that these goals must be pursued within our planetary boundaries. It is very important that the topic of this first part of this event is the decade of action. 2030 is only 9 years away and we must act now. We should not stop building knowledge, dialogue, tools, and systems, but most of all, we need to take action on what we already know, make the necessary changes to how we do things, and change the structures so that the right thing is easier and more attractive for everyone. This calls for both practical action and strong leadership. Our societies have undergone great changes in the past, and we can do it again. The second topic today, coordinating voluntary local and national reviews, is one of the tools for creating a fruitful multi-level dialogue. One of the advantages of the SDGs is having a common language to discuss common complex challenges, and this can be an important contribution. Viken is looking forward to learning from taking part in these important discussions with people and organizations who have great knowledge and experiences with these topics, and we hope everyone will find these 2 days both interesting and relevant. We are also very excited about the launching of the project report about Viken today. We are looking forward to diving into it and have a discussion about how we, together with the other stakeholders, can use the analysis and recommendations in our further work with the SDGs. So once again, thank you to the OECD for organizing this event and letting Viken take part in the process. And I hope you all have a great time in this digital webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tonya. Now we are going to hear from Mr. Nikolai Astrup, Minister of Local Government and Modernization of Norway. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear friends of the SDGs. I want to thank the OECD and Viken County for inviting me to this third roundtable on cities and regions for the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a pleasure to address this distinguished roundtable with participants from all over the world. 5 years have passed since the SDGs was adopted by the UN. We've seen progress in many areas. Life expectancy is up, infant mortality rates are down. The number of pupils in primary and secondary education has never been higher. Armed conflicts are at an all-time low. Never before have so many infants and children been vaccinated. The number of people living in extreme poverty has never been lower. And digitalization and new technologies make developing countries able to leapfrog traditional stages of development. Now, although much has been achieved, this is not the time to sit back and relax. We're still facing challenges, and the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been clear. The world is not on track to meet the SDGs by 2030. Progress is simply too slow. We see mass migrations, people still lack jobs, and climate change is already causing catastrophic incidents across the globe. The corona pandemic has set back the progress on many areas, not only health, and is making it even more difficult to reach the SDGs by 2030. Many people have lost their income. Schools are closed, just to mention a few areas. I know this topic is on the agenda tomorrow. The pandemic has also illustrated how much we depend on each other and how powerful political decisions can be taken when necessary. Now we have to use these decisions not only to make a way out of the crisis, but also to promote a new sustainable development paradigm. We are now we're not returning to the normal of 2019. We are creating a more sustainable future by building back better. We have now only 10 years left to achieve the 17 goals. Therefore, the UN has declared the 2020s as the decade of action. Here in Norway, we are working on a national action plan for the SDGs. Our main goal is to make Norway better and more sustainable by translating the SDGs into relevant actions for Norway. I hold goal number 17 as my favorite because the SDGs are so inevitably tied together. The goals cannot be solved one by one. However, achieving the ambitious targets of the 2030 Agenda requires innovative partnerships that bring together the public sector, civil society, private sector, and academia. We will only succeed if we work closely together. According to the UN, more than 100 of the 169 targets cannot be achieved without the effort from regional and local authorities. Regional and local authorities are responsible for community planning, land use planning, and they provide basic services for their inhabitants. They are important contributors to SDG 3 and 4 on health and education, goal number 6 on clean water and sanitation, goal number 7 on affordable and clean energy, and goal 11 on sustainable cities and communities. The municipalities have also crucial influence on goal 13 on climate change, goal 14 life underwater, and goal 15 life on land. Local and regional authorities also influence several other goals. They are big employers and responsible for huge public procurements each year. Therefore, they are key players to contribute to goal 8 on decent work, goal 9 on innovation, and 12 on sustainable consumption and production. Regional and local authorities in Norway have the tools to improve people's lives and to ensure no one will be left behind. They have tools to set the framework conditions for sustainable development. That's why we have challenged the Norwegian counties and municipalities to incorporate the SDGs as part of their planning. And not only challenged, I have to say, we expect them to incorporate the SDGs as part of their plans. Many Norwegian counties and municipalities have taken the challenge seriously and are developing strategies for implementation of the SDGs. Others are still struggling with the concept and how they can use the SDGs in their work and contribute to the goals. Viken County is one of the frontrunners in Norway. They have developed a strategic plan for the county based on the SDGs and involved the community in the process, particularly young people. The regional and local authorities can provide innovative ideas and skills that we need to turn the vision of the 2030 Agenda into a reality. Today's roundtable will discuss how cities and regions can use the SDGs to improve people's lives. The purpose of the presentations and discussions today and tomorrow is to provide us all with more insights and contribute to further progress. Let us use them to take concrete actions that are necessary to achieve the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Now I would like to turn to the OECD Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Ulrik Knudsen, who is going to deliver the keynote speech launching the 3 new OECD reports on SDGs. DSG, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lamia, and let me also join you in thanking our Norwegian friends for their early interventions. Here, the chair of the county government of Viken, Tonje Brenna, and not least you, Minister Nikolai Astrup. It's been a while since we met. We usually also always meet at these events, but it's good to see you joining us virtually. So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Minister, it's a delight to be here to open the 3rd OECD Roundtable on cities and regions for the Sustainable Development Goals, known of course as the SDGs, and to launch 3 new OECD reports on a territorial approach to the SDGs. In Flanders, Belgium, in my home country, Denmark, southern Denmark, and in Viken, Norway. These reports are a part of the broader OECD program on a territorial approach to the SDGs, which include 9 pilot case studies aimed at supporting cities and regions to develop, implement, and monitor strategies to deliver on all SDGs. In addition to these 3 case studies, the program has also engaged with the cities of Bonn in Germany, Kitakyushu in Japan, Kópavogur in Iceland, and Moscow in Russia, as well as the regions of Cordoba, Argentina, and Parana in Brazil. I'd like to warmly thank the representatives of these cities also, and the regions also, who are with us today and tomorrow. So why, during a global pandemic, do the SDGs remain important? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic brings unprecedented challenges to drive sustainable development in both OECD and non-OECD countries. It is the 3rd and greatest economic, financial, and social shock of the 21st century after 9/11 and the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9. A shock that's brought to a halt production in many countries, a shock that has hit trade and supply chains, and a shock that's already cost many lives and livelihoods. It's also been a shock that has been disproportionately affecting women, the young, and the poor. And in such times, the SDGs are more relevant than ever, offering a clear framework to help cities, regions, and national governments to build back better when we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis. The framework of the SDGs and what is known as the 2030 Agenda is relevant for countries at all stages of development, including OECD members, of course. The SDGs remind us that as we put in place measures to support the recovery, we do have a choice. We can choose to protect and sustain old models of production, models that pollute, models that exclude, and models that impose costs on future generations. Or we can choose a new path with the SDGs as our guide. But why then should we adopt a local approach, you may ask? The OECD's action plan on the SDGs is absolutely clear. We cannot achieve the SDGs without local and regional governments. Why? Because around the world, public policies and investments are a shared responsibility across levels of government. Cities and regions have a key role to play. In most countries, they lead investments in water, in housing, in transport, in infrastructure, land use, and in climate change. They can also build consensus about how to do so because of their close connection to citizens. Subnational governments account for 60% of total public investment and are responsible for 64% of environment and climate-related public investment in OECD countries. But 5 years since the adoption of the SDGs in 2015 and 10 years until their endpoint in 2030, the reality is that no country is on track to achieve all SDGs by 2030. And this is also true at the subnational level. The OECD localized indicator framework for the SDGs highlight that at least 80% of regions have not achieved the end values in any of the 17 goals. This is why the OECD started conducting policy dialogues with several cities and regions in order to help them understand how they perform, where they need to prioritize, and how they can guide decision-making going forward. So in that spirit, in launching the reports of Flanders, Southern Denmark, and Viken today, I'd like to highlight 3 important takeaway messages that have emerged from these policy dialogues. First message, regions and cities are using the SDGs as a framework to assess their performance in a range of policy domains and understand their strengths, weaknesses, challenges, and opportunities. The data that we have produced show that these 3 regions perform above the average of OECD regions in the majority of the SDGs. Let me single out one key area regions particularly excel. In Flanders, strong R&D and a dynamic business climate are key assets to drive sustainable development. With 2.7% of its GDP spent on R&D, the region belongs to the top 20% of OECD regions in terms of R&D expenditure. In southern Denmark, 87% of citizens expressed high levels of satisfaction with healthcare availability and quality, well above 77%, which is the end value for this SD3 indicator. In Viken, 100% of the electricity production came from renewable sources, mainly hydropower, well and truly, of course, outperforming the average of OECD regions, which is at 41%. But beside these strong performances, important challenges persist in each of these regions. In Flanders, energy and environmental protection remain key areas of improvement. High car dependency, that's 52 motor vehicles per 100 people, above the average of 40, generates significant air pollution with microparticle exposure levels higher than recommended by the WHO and above the OECD average. While emissions related to electricity production is currently more than 3 times the SDG end goal, exceeds 280 tons of CO2 equivalent per gigawatt hour compared to a suggested end value of less than 90 tons. Turning to southern Denmark, air, soil, and water pollution are looming challenges for regional development. In 2019, around 96% of the population were exposed to microparticles, a much higher share than in OECD regions on average. The average stands at 59%. And every year, 75 tons of pollution dissolves into the groundwater and is transported into the sea, with 3 out of the national government's 10 priority pollution sites are located in southern Denmark. In Viken, uneven growth and spatial inequality between rural areas and urban centers threatens long-term sustainability. For instance, in relation to Viken's labor market, remote areas from Oslo show weaker performance than close ones. In parallel, Viken's natural environment is subject to pressures from population growth and expansion of built-up areas, poses challenges to the environment. Around 11% of the area of Viken was a national park or nature reserve in 2019, compared to the national average of 17% and the OECD average of 19%. So there are strengths and weaknesses in all regions. Second message, cities and regions are using the SDGs as policymaking tool as a policymaking tool rather than as a compliance agenda. In all three cases, the SDGs were not viewed as a burden, but as an opportunity to rethink drastically from the ground up how to plan, invest, budget, and engage at local and regional levels. In southern Denmark, the SDGs were used to design the regional government strategy called Southern Denmark of the Future 2020-2023 and kick off initiatives to address environmental challenges in the region. In Viken, the SDGs provided a holistic framework to reform governance by merging 3 counties into one. The new regional planning strategy for a sustainable Viken 2020-2024 uses the concept of planetary boundaries to achieve sustainability over time. And in Flanders, the plan Focus 2030 provides concrete and midterm objectives to adapt and implement the SDGs at a regional level with 7 transition priorities ranging from circular economy to lifelong learning, transport and mobility, and energy, amongst others. And then the final and third message. Local and regional governments are leveraging the SDGs to strengthen multi-level governance for sustainability. Southern Denmark is actively engaging with the 22 municipalities in implementing the SDGs. The mechanisms and fora connected to the regional strategy, including regular meetings between the 22 local mayors and the chairwoman of the regional council, are used to that effect. Flanders contributed significantly to the first voluntary national review of Belgium through the Interministerial Conference for Sustainable Development, while the Association of Flemish Municipalities played a key role in strengthening municipal capacity to use the SDGs to improve local policies. And Viken has leveraged the guidance by the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization, and we have the minister with us, to further urge municipalities to integrate the SDGs in their strategic planning. So the 3 reports provide customized policy recommendations to go the extra mile and use the SDGs as a means to design better local and regional policies for better lives. For Viken, for example, the OECD recommends using the SDGs to adopt a functional approach to ensure balanced regional development through in-smart low-carbon mobility to reduce car dependence, and R&D and cluster policies to create jobs in less dense and rural areas. In Flanders, the use of the SDGs could further enhance strategic alignment between federal, regional, provincial, and municipal sustainable development strategies and between domestic and external actions. While for southern Denmark, the SDGs can be used as a tool to improve environmental sustainability. Climate objectives can be coupled with promoting active means of transport like cycling, walking, or shared transport solutions, while also contributing to health and well-being as well as economic benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me, in closing, finalize our 3 front-running regions for their remarkable efforts to localize the SDGs, but also for providing a source of inspiration for other local and regional governments to follow that path. With these reports and your courage, I trust that you have the ingredients to pursue an ambitious agenda for more sustainable, inclusive, smart, and resilient cities and regions. Let's remember that we always have a choice. Even in a world economy shaken by COVID-19, we can choose to step back into the past, or we can take a brave step forward towards a more sustainable future, respecting the SDGs. For that, the SDGs are exactly our best and most certain guide. I hope that this work will also guide your efforts towards sustainability over the years to come, and we certainly at the OECD stand ready to support you going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General. That positive and ambitious note conclude this opening session of the Roundtable. I now wish to hand over to Aziza Akmouche. She's the head of Cities, Urban Policy and Sustainable Development Division in my department. She will moderate the next session on a decade of action, the key role of cities and regions to meet the SDGs. Aziza has been leading this work with the team, with Stefano Marta, with Stine, with Aline, with Antonio and Lores. So I'm very grateful to them. I wish you all a very successful roundtable, and I look forward to hearing how the discussions progress later today and into tomorrow. Thank you very much. Aziza, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lamia. Thank you, DSG. Thank you, Minister. And thank you, Tonya, for these opening remarks. Our pleasure to jump into the first panel now. The idea is really to hear from the representatives of different cities and regions that have engaged in these pilots and to get a bit of insights of what they've learned from those policy dialogues that have been going on for sometimes a year and a half now, and most importantly, how they intend to use some of the findings and policy recommendations that come out of these reports, because the reports are very much the visible part of the work, but a lot has been ongoing in each of these places to build consensus around the what to do and how to get there in terms of using the SDGs. And it's really my pleasure to have this first panel kick off on a decade of action. I'll introduce the speakers as they come in. Just a few reminders in between to invite all of you to flag some of the questions you may have using the Q&A function of this webinar. We already have a question or two there that we will address in the panel discussion at the end, and also to not hesitate to tweet, retweet, and follow us on social media at OECD_local. It's now my pleasure to invite the first panelists. They've all been briefed to take a good 5 minutes, no slide, and to respond to one very basic question. What's in it for you in leveraging the potential of the SDGs, and how are you intending to use the findings of this work? And I'm delighted to start with Southern Denmark. We were supposed to have Mr. Søren Rasmussen, chairman of the Committee for Regional Development of the region, who unfortunately fell sick over the weekend. And I'm very happy that Bo Hemfgarn Eriksen, who's the chief analyst in the regional development region of Southern Denmark, with us today, and to explain to us very concretely what the region is currently doing on the SDGs, the relevance of that OECD project. This was the first pilot to join the consortium 2 years ago, and how you're going to use some of the recommendations. Bo, thank you for being with us. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to speak at this roundtable. And I will speak on behalf of the region and of Søren Rasmussen. And we have been looking forward to this meeting and sharing insights and ideas about our common and sustainable future. And while the circumstances are unusual regarding this roundtable, this is just one example that we're finding ways to battle the pandemic and how it challenges us. So we persevere, we find practical solutions and move on. Anyhow, so we have been fortunate to be a part of this project, and as a pilot region, we have learned much from working with both the OECD and working with our colleagues in the other pilot regions and cities. And I believe that our participation prepares us for making the Sustainable Development Goals our goals. And in the region of Southern Denmark, we are committed now to the SDGs. We have integrated the SDGs in our regional development strategy. We form partnerships with various stakeholders that contribute to the SDGs. We also try to integrate SDGs in our daily administrative work and procedures. And we work to raise awareness and to provide knowledge about SDGs in a regional context. And allow me to elaborate on how we work with the SDGs in the region of Southern Denmark. And starting with the regional development strategy, this was approved by the regional council in May after a year-long process. And when our strategy was in the making, we worked with and consulted many stakeholders, held many meetings. And together with our stakeholders, we've now developed a roadmap for the future Southern Denmark. We work with the municipalities in the regions, our educational institutions, NGOs, and citizens to identify key challenges and set what we believe are ambitious goals for the region. And the SDGs are of key importance to the regional development strategy. And overall, we focus on 11 of the SDGs where we can make a difference. And if you include SDG 17 on partnerships, we work with 12 of the SDGs. And for each of our 6 strategy tracks in the strategy, we relate the specific goals for regional development to the relevant SDGs. For example, the strategy track regarding green transition, climate and resources contributes to 4 of the SDGs. These are the SDGs on sustainable energy, sustainable cities, on responsible consumption and production, and of course on climate change. And as I said, partnerships are essential for us. We work to put the SDGs into action with our partners. A good example is our collaboration with Odense Municipality, the water utility Vandcenter Syd, and the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland, where we work together to protect groundwater in an area west of Odense. So in that sense, it's very concrete. Climate change is an example of how we try to integrate the SDGs into our daily work processes. So whenever the regional council or a committee of the regional council makes a decision, there must be a climate assessment as part of the proposal. And this is not the only example. We also try to reduce our climate footprint in concrete and practical ways. For example, we continuously work towards transitioning our fleet of vehicles to lower emission and even zero emission vehicles where that is possible. So these include our fleet of cars that people in the administration uses, but also the buses in the service of the 2 regional bus operators. And also in the region of southern Denmark, we have a long history of working with our stakeholders and a history of providing our stakeholders with knowledge about the regional context. We already conduct many analyses and provide data for our stakeholders to inform dialogue and to help our policy decisions. But in the coming year, we increase our efforts to raise awareness about the SDGs. We will work towards making data and insights about the SDGs and their specific southern Denmark context available for citizens, municipalities, educational institutions, and other stakeholders. And our hope is that these efforts will help and energize efforts throughout the region towards building a sustainable future for southern Denmark. And we try to do our part, and we must all contribute as best as we can in order to solve the very big challenges that lie ahead of us. While there's still much more to do in southern Denmark and elsewhere, I believe we are moving in the right direction. And in southern Denmark, we have taken the first steps towards a sustainable future. We continue our journey and we are on the right path to making the UN Sustainable Development Goals into our goals. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Bo. And there's already a few questions in the chat for you. We'll come back to them later, relating to the headaches you may have experienced in this journey of localizing the SDGs. I think there's a lot in what you've said that shows how, going back to the Deputy Secretary General's message earlier, you've gone beyond the compliance agenda and you've been using this framework as a way to adapt, revamp, renew, reshape your regional development strategy and manage some of the trade-offs. And I think how you've explained the way this helps you mainstream some of the mega trends such as climate change, or even go beyond the traditional SDG 11, which is perceived as the relevant one for subnational government to cut across a number of goals, is very spot on. Thank you very much, Bo. And let me now turn to our second panelist, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Binance, Mrs. Julie Binance, who's the Secretary General of the region of Flanders. And Julie, we have the same questions for you. How do you work with the SDGs? How do you see the inputs from this work guiding or featuring into your future decision-making related to Flanders sustainable development? You have the floor.
Hi, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here, and I'm really happy to be able to meet you. Even this is only possible in a digital way right now, but reaching out, staying in touch and sharing ideas remains so very important. Fortunately, we are lucky to be able to do so even if it's put stress on our professional goals, on our personal lives, and our ability to continue building a road towards the achievement of the SDGs. Not everybody has the same opportunities, and it only proves how important it is to remain committed to leaving no one behind. As you may have read in our region report, Flanders has translated the SDGs into 51 goals that are specifically relevant, paired with 111 indicators. These goals and indicators will be further refined based on long-term strategies and indicator sets. And as an example, we have had some Flemish sectoral long-term policy plans that will contribute to the SDGs that have been approved since last year. For instance, our housing and living plan, our energy and climate plan, and our air policy plan. And we are now working on a policy plan for our territorial space use in Flanders and our mobility vision 2040. And the 2030 goals that are linked to these sectoral plans are also integrated into our, let's say, umbrella plan Focus 2030. We also have a Vision 2050 in Flanders that sets out the transitions we need for a more sustainable society. And in the 7 priority transition processes that we have identified, we use governance techniques aimed at involving stakeholders, supporting experiments, removing obstacles, and scaling up new practices. We also very much appreciate our partnership with the Association of Flemish Cities and Municipalities, whom you'll be hearing from shortly. And for this OECD project, we have worked together with this association and strive for cooperation and comparability in goals and indicators. And it has increased our understanding of each other and opened up new opportunities to work together. So we are very happy with the many grassroots projects that are currently being launched, and we will increase decentralization and give more competencies to local governments in order to do so. The project has also given us the opportunity to compare with other governments, to inspire and become inspired, of course, to deepen our relationships and open new avenues of cooperation. We have visited Cordoba and southern Denmark, and we have welcomed Cordoba, Viken, and Bonn. It was so nice to have them. And then came the COVID-19 crisis, a crisis that has hit and is hitting us still very hard. And we believe 2 elements are essential in our recovery, 2 elements that are also directly linked to the implementation of the SDGs. First, we need all stakeholders to engage in recovery because, as the Secretary General of the UN himself stated, together we can build back better. And secondly, sustainability has to be an important aspect of the recovery plans. For instance, our economic recovery should contribute maximally to decarbonizing our economy and society. Therefore, we want to invest in energetic renovation of public and private buildings, urban renewal projects, and sustainable transportation infrastructure, very important still in Flanders, including cycling and railway infrastructure, mobility as a service, etc. And in the move towards a more circular economy, we will map the data linked to the waste flows in order to bring these potential raw materials together. So closing the circle. Healthcare workers are a modern time hero. I mustn't tell you that, everybody knows. So there are also plans to increase the remuneration of care personnel and invest in healthcare, mental well-being in youth, social housing, and welfare infrastructure. And also as a knowledge hub, we will focus on digitalization, research and innovation, lifelong learning and vocational training. And last but not least, Flanders is also a region rich in culture and art, so we will also invest in our cultural heritage. So we very much welcome the OECD recommendations, and we will use the SDGs as an instrument to strengthen synergies between our transition processes that we identified, help us guide our recovery plans, develop indicators, and streamline the SDGs into the policy priorities of each department of our government and also into our decentralized development cooperation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Julie Bijnen, Secretary General of the region of Flanders, for those inspiring words. And I see the process you've been following in Flanders follows closely what we've seen in other pilots, trying to take the SDG framework first and see what's relevant for your place out there based on the challenges you're facing, and then seeing how you are able to adjust some of the policy plans. And you've mentioned housing, mobility, energy, and climate, amongst others, against what you've defined therein as priority. And I think what you said about the peer learning and the mutual learning experience between the different pilots, which is invisible in a report per se, is one of the greatest value added I can see of this consortium project. And we'll get back tomorrow to some of the COVID-19 recovery strategies and the lessons that cities and regions have taken from this pandemic to fit for the future. I think some of the suggestions you made there in terms of passing the COVID-19 reality check are really valuable. Thank you very much. This closes the intervention of Flanders, and let me now move to our third speaker. My pleasure to introduce Anne Romsas from the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities. You are federating a number of cities and regions under your umbrella organization, and we've seen in all the countries where we've worked how important those city and region network are to foster experience sharing and to create the impulse, the impetus that is needed to engage local and regional governments. So Anne, please tell us how you've been working in Norway and how you've seen the role of cities and regions gain traction in this localization agenda.
Thank you so much, Aziza. Yes, in Norway, we have taken great pleasure in taking part in this project. And now I will share some experiences on how municipalities and counties have worked to meet the SDGs and how the policy recommendations from this work in this project will support their ambitions. In Norway, we experience the benefit of collaboration across tiers of government, and KAs maintains a close dialogue with the Ministry of Local Government that since January 2020 has been the national coordinating body for the SDGs. This year, when 10 years remain, Norway will finally draft an implementation strategy for the Agenda 2030. The national government has taken some steps to strengthen horizontal and vertical coordination to implement the SDGs, but more can be done to raise awareness about the SDGs and foster a whole of society approach. Many municipalities and counties in Norway base their strategic planning efforts on the SDGs, both to ensure sustainable service provision and future-oriented local and regional developments. And our host here today, the Viken County, has been one of the front runners in this field. But some studies have also shown, and our dialogue with our members confirm, that there is still work to be done so that all municipalities and counties take part in the effort to achieve the SDGs. While some are proactively incorporating the SDGs in their local policies and strategies, others have limited capacity to work with the goals strategically and systematically. Therefore, in dialogue with our members, KS has looked at how we can motivate, support, and encourage all our members' work to meet the SDGs. Efforts are being made to translate the global goals into a local context, develop measurement systems for progress, create arenas for networking and sharing of experiences, as well as encouraging political commitment, willingness to change, and citizens' acceptance. To succeed with the SDGs, new and strong partnerships are needed, as stated in the policy recommendations. The municipalities in Norway already cooperate with the business community, with universities and colleges, with NGOs and citizens to create a greener and more sustainable society. And the SDG offers a common language and ambition to construct such partnerships on. Norwegian municipalities and counties are mobilizing the private sector on the SDGs through public procurement, as also is one of the recommendations in the policy report. It is a vital instrument to achieve smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth if used strategically. The public sector constitutes a major buying force. More than 55 billion euros per year is spent on purchasing goods and services in Norway. And as we speak, 11 Nordic cities have joined forces, challenging the market to develop solutions for zero-emission delivery of goods. Trøndelag, a region in the middle of Norway, are now pushing the market to develop environmentally friendly energy sources for express boats. And our capital, Oslo, has together with suppliers developed the world's first emission-free construction site. And several municipalities and county authorities have formed the Norwegian Network of Excellence on SDG City Transition to join forces in localizing the SDGs, demonstrate local adaptation, and accelerate impact by linking local action to regional, national, and international partners. KS supports this network and actively broadcasts its achievements. The network is expanding rapidly and is closely connected to the United for Smart Sustainable Cities implementation program, a UN initiative coordinated by ITU, UNEC, and UN Habitat, and supported by 14 UN agencies. KS sees these works as valuable contributions to the ongoing work on developing measurement systems for progress and policy recommendations. We consider that multitude in approaches is valuable, and we work to identify synergies between the different methods and tools. KS has therefore initiated an R&D project together with the Statistics Norway to develop a taxonomy for sorting the relevant and appropriate local and regional indicators in relation to the SDGs. Our aim is to acknowledge, support, and promote bottom-up monitoring and data management that creates local and regional value. Norway will present a national voluntary review next summer, and some municipalities are planning to develop local voluntary reviews. In order to strengthen local and regional voices in the VNR process, KS has determined to develop a voluntary sub-national review. We will, in 2021, continue collaborating with our international network and national stakeholders with the ambition to better align these processes. And the policy recommendations in these reports from Viken and the other regions will be very important for our further work. And it is my conviction that your work over these 2 days will contribute to the transformative actions needed for a sustainable future. And I am surely looking forward to the coming days.
Thank you very much, Anne. And can I ask, what is this building behind you in the virtual background?
That is the building where our organization is situated in
Excellent.
the center of Oslo.
So that's good to know. We can't be there, but at least we know what this looks like from the outside. Thank you very much. And I think a number of the points that you've made in terms of some of the cross-cutting actions that are needed to unlock the potential of cities and regions, and in particular, those relating to public procurement and to public investments are really hitting the mark and will be essential going forward. And glad to hear the news about the voluntary local and national reviews. We'll have a full section devoted to that in a few minutes. Thank you, Anne, and lots of questions on the chat and on the Q&A. Please continue to submit your questions. We'll have a good 25 minutes to go through them. We have over 350 people online out of almost 500 registered, so many more will be joining, and we won't be able to give the floor to each of you. So that's why it's very important that you flag questions you may have either targeted to specific members of the panel or to all of them in the Q&A, and we'll get back to them after we wrap up this panel. We have 2 more speakers to go, and it's now my pleasure to turn to the next speaker, Mrs. Daphne Gross-Jensen from the Department of Regions and Municipalities of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, also known as BMZ in Germany. We have worked extensively, I have to say, with BMZ and with Engagement Global in this program on a territorial approach to the SDGs. You've played an instrumental role in driving action from many of the cities and lenders that you work with on a daily basis. Actually, one of the pilots of this consortium that is born, which we launched in the presence of the mayor 3 weeks ago, is the result of this triangular cooperation with BMZ. Daphne, could you tell us a bit more how you see the role of your ministry in this localization agenda, what the value of such policy dialogues are, and how you intend to use them going forward? Daphne, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on this panel and to be listening and talking to all of you today. What is our role? Why do we engage in localizing SDGs as a ministry working on economic cooperation and development? The first reason probably comes from the 2030 agenda negotiations themselves. We do believe that SDG 17 is one of the most important SDGs, so global partnership. And we believe that partnership needs to be a multi-actor. Being a federal state, it was kind of natural to say that we needed to engage also the subnational levels. We do that every day, and we need to do it for agenda implementation. For SDGs cannot be, realized without the regions and cities. We did start with a localizing the SDGs project in 2016 because we believe that we could use cities' knowledge, cities' experiences, but also international networks that started from town twinnings, for example, in order to start exchange and mutual learning on the SDGs. This project does support cities in Germany and municipalities at large, not only cities, in drawing up their own local agenda strategies, because we do believe that we need some kind of coherent approach. So we do need to see what's relevant in each municipality, but also we do need to be able to have a national and an international dialogue on how this feeds into the bigger picture. We do, of course, want to leverage the city's potential for DDC, for decentralized development cooperation. It has also already been mentioned. But we do also believe that there's a lot of mutual learning that we can actually capitalize on. To give you an example, I'm living in the city of Berlin. We have been experiencing a severe drought for the past 3 years. I do believe we have a lot to learn from, for example, the South African experience with, how did they manage drought, water rationalization for big cities. This is why we believe that beyond, the strict development cooperation settings, cities have a lot to offer. Bonn thankfully agreed to enter into the OECD pilot project and to exchange on their experience with localizing strategies. They are also publishing a voluntary local review. We do hope that other cities in Germany will follow their example so that we can actually feed back all these experiences into an international dialogue, which again will help us to use local experience for international negotiations, because usually it's a federal or central government to government negotiation, which is of course abstract and might not reflect all the local interests. And city to city cooperation can actually be a lot closer to the people and their interests, and make them experience the need for a 2030 agenda and SDGs in their local context.
Thank you very much, Daphne. And I think the connection you are making, and we had similar conversations with Flanders, VVSG as the umbrella organization of Flemish municipalities, but also with other DAC member countries, the connection you're making between the localization agenda for the SDGs and the development and cooperation strategy and policy of countries that are pioneer in this area, such as Belgium and and Germany is very spot on, because we've been emphasizing a lot that the SDGs have both an inward-looking function, so they help you understand how you are performing and where you get better, but they also have an outward function that maybe was more prominent under the MDGs agenda, because it was very much about the global West supporting the South, which is no longer the main rationale, but this connection of how you are reshaping also your decentralized development cooperation policies, I think is also spot on. So thank you very much for that. And that takes me to our last panelist before we get in a sort of warm-up Zoom poll with all of you, and then jump into your questions and answers. It's my pleasure to introduce Wim Dries. Wim, Mayor of Genk in Belgium, but also President of the VVSG that I've just mentioned. We've worked extremely well with Bart and many of your colleagues. Thank you for the support. Wim, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Also, I can't start my video because it was set off, but I hope it can start on.
Okay, we'll have the team unlock that to the extent possible.
The host has stopped it, so.
Good. So maybe if the support team, and I suggest, Wim, you go ahead while we are fixing.
Okay, thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, now I think it will work. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, also from me, a warm welcome. It's great to be here and to tell something about VVSG and how we, what was in it for us and how we felt in working to this report, but also working, of course, with the SDGs. And as a president of the Association of Flemish Cities and Municipalities, I'm happy to participate in this roundtable, also together with my colleague, Julie Bijnens from the Flemish government. We had a fruitful collaboration from the OECD report, and I'm sure we will continue our dialogue in the future. For the last 5 years, the VVSG has supported local governments in adopting the Agenda 2030 with success, I must say. Flemish municipalities are considered worldwide as frontrunners in localizing the SDGs. For example, more than 200 of the 300 municipalities have used the SDGs when developing their new multi-annual policy plans for the period 2020 to 2025. Some have even gone further and have used employing the 17 SDGs as their own starting points for their own local goals. We commit ourselves to keep stimulating local bottom-up approaches to the SDGs. In doing this, we give substance to multiple recommendations to the OECD made in the Flanders case study report. And I want to give you 4 elements that you can also find in the report, but I want to bring them shortly also to this table. First of all, we will keep raising awareness on the SDGs. VVSG organizes the Week of the Sustainable Municipalities. During this week in September, participating municipalities celebrate local heroes for sustainable development, and though also including the public, also including our citizens. Through these heroes, they make the SDGs more concrete toward their citizens, toward their neighborhoods. Further, we recently started an SDG Academy. This is an online course on the SDGs aimed at both starting and more advanced municipalities. The course is also accessible to employees of the province and of the Flemish government. Additionally, we count on the support of the Flemish government to raise awareness on the SDGs within its own organization, but also in its work and communication towards citizen and local governments. Secondly, we also support the OECD's recommendation to integrate the SDGs in programs of decentralized development cooperation. Already, multiple Flemish municipalities work with the SDGs as a framework for reflection with their international partners. They, for example, use the SDGs to structure their communication about the partnership, but also use the SDGs to think about common priorities and to make their programs and activities more sustainable. I can give the own example in Genk with Francistown from Botswana. We already have for 15 years a cooperation with Francistown around capacity building and much more. But in our renewal of our cooperation, we use the SDGs as a guideline for the framework that we will work upon the following 5 to 10 years. Further, and I come to my third element, we agree that SDGs indicator frameworks at different government levels should be more aligned. And I think that's an important one because there are already a lot of data and good practices available at local level. This provides many opportunities for the federal and the Flemish government to take into account local data when selecting and developing their SDGs indicator. This way, we can conclude all government levels with national reporting on the SDGs, a necessary exercise seeing that local governments are crucial actors in the realizing of Agenda 2030. Further, I also plea for further desegregation of local data according to, for example, geography, by example, neighborhoods, but also gender, age, ethnicity, and things like that. This will help us to optimally use data to improve local policy. At the same time, we will strengthen SDG monitoring and reporting at the local level. VVSG is, for example, coordinating a work group of about 15 municipalities on this topic. We look into the different possibilities of local SDG monitoring and reporting, including also voluntary local reviews. And by example, the city of Ghent is part of this working group and is the first Belgian municipality to produce this year a voluntary local review. Also in my own city in Genk, we are looking how can we report to the city council, but also to the Flemish government using our agreement, our program for the following 5 years, the indicators of the SDGs, and how can we make sure that it's a complete and integrated set. Lastly, I agree with my colleague Julie Bijnens that we need all stakeholders to engage in the recovery from COVID-19, for which the SDGs provide an excellent compass. We have already taken some important steps towards more intergovernment collaboration in the OECD study, for example, has allowed VVSG and the Flemish government to get to know each other better and to develop a reflex to involve each other in our work. However, there is still room for improvement concerning intergovernmental coordination on sustainable development involving all the government levels in Belgium. As government level closest to the citizens and essential in realizing Agenda 2030, local governments need to be involved in this coordination of the SDGs. And we need a seat in the discussion of in the decision-making tables. Let me therefore conclude by making also, if I may, a recommendation myself towards the OECD. Involve, ladies and gentlemen, local governments and their umbrella associations in other case studies as well, and involve them from the beginning in your future work and activities around or on the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you, Wim, and again to VVSG and Genk colleagues for the great support. I think we've seen the extent to which the Mayor leadership, but also umbrella organizations act as facilitators, promoters, enablers of that transition related to the localization agenda. And there are a few questions that have popped up from the chat, and I'll invite maybe your team to share in the chat, for example, the link to the SDG Academy. This seems to have triggered a lot of interest here and there. And then a few questions related to Flanders. I'll come back to that when we open the discussion. We're on time. This is great. And before we get to your questions, and I invite all of you to continue to submit your questions via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom bar, because we have over 350 participants, so we would rather collect them in writing. I will now invite you all as participants to take part in a Zoom poll. So we are going to hear and to see on the screen the Zoom question. Everybody can participate regardless of the number of people in each delegation. And we have one question for all of you, and we invite you to pick the top 2 responses. So the question is, how can cities and regions best use the SDGs to improve sustainable development for their residents? You have to pick 2 among the different options that are provided. Number 1, design plans, policies, strategies that are based on the SDGs. Number 2, use the SDGs indicators to assess their strengths and weaknesses. Number 3, allocate budget based on the implementation of the 2030 agenda at local and regional level. Number 4, align policy priorities, incentives, objectives across levels of government. And number 5, engage all territorial stakeholders in policy making. You pick your two top choices, and once you are done, we invite you to click on submit. And I am keeping an eye on the numbers. We have over 150 people that have already responded. So let's give ourselves an additional 10 seconds. Numbers continue to go up. Thank you very much. This is not meant to be completely statistically relevant and precise, but it's mainly to get some thoughts from you in terms of how this agenda can be used, as was said this morning, not as a policy, not as a compliance agenda only, but rather as a policy tool. We have over 200 people. Maybe we'll take 6-7 more seconds, Lawrence, until we get to 2 minutes. I think this will be it. So I suggest we now close the poll, and I'll invite the team to show the results. So those are the results that everybody can see. Coming first and by far for 60% of you, using the SDGs as a tool to design plans, policies, and strategies, followed for almost 40% as a way to align policy priorities, incentives, and objectives across levels of government, not so far from the budget allocation item, the stakeholder engagement, and the indicators and data that also come quite prominently. Thank you very much. This was a good test and reality check to some of the functions that we see for the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals in that localization agenda. And let me now, and we will maybe stop sharing the poll. Good, you can get rid of the chart on your screen. Let me now maybe get to some of the questions, and thank you all for having been so energetic and dynamic in the 15 minutes left that come out of a rough scan I've done at what I've seen in the Q&A function, and I will go back now to each of the panelists, and maybe I leave a question or two aside and hand over to Stefano for one of them. I suggest that the question that is related to the voluntary local review for small cities be left for the next item, because it's really about how we do such local reviews, and that can be tackled then, and that the question related to COVID-19 be left for tomorrow, because this will be the purpose of the session. And that, Stefano, you take over at the end in a minute, how we can build synergies between the program on a circular economy and the one on a territorial approach to the SDGs, which has come out as well in the list. Maybe going back to the panelists, and we will start probably from the other way around, and I will go back, start with you, Wim Dries, as mayor. There are a number of participants that have flagged that it's always easy, but also welcome, of course, to share what is working, the success stories, and what has proved effective, but it's much more difficult to share what is challenging and what are some of the obstacles or some of the problems you may be facing as political leaders to get the uptake and the buy-in of residents to that SDG agenda that sometimes may appear as a bit disconnected from the real challenges you face every day. So if you can elaborate a bit on that, on what you've seen in maybe Genk or Flanders overall as being the main challenge to secure that buy-in, and the main lesson that you've taken out of it for the acceleration in that remaining decade. And I invite you maybe 1-2 minute maximum. You don't need to elaborate a lot, but just to give a hint at how you would address this question. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's I think everybody knows here that the SDGs will be local or won't be. So that's one of the challenges that we have. And I think that there are three elements that I think that are really challenging. First of all, on the level of the city itself, that's how I experience it. In a city of 66,000 people, we have 1,000 employees, to give the framework as a working basis and to really use it not only in words, but also in deeds, in acts that you do. And that took us quite a while for everybody to get them aboard, to make sure that they understand the framework, but they also understand because we are all doing many good things. We did that in the past and we are still doing that. And to make the combination between the SDGs and what we are doing, I found that one of the elements that we worked really on, and you need to do that phase to go in an acceleration in your own city. Secondly, I think it's important, and I said it also, is how can we interact with other levels of government? And in Belgium, we have the Flemish, the provincial and the Flemish, but also the federal level, but also the European level. And at this time, I see more and more at all levels that we are all aligning those SDGs together. And that's very important because you definitely have a lot of calls by example, Flemish government or federal or European government. Well, if those calls don't use the SDGs as framework, it's very difficult to have your own plans, but to fit them on the other plans. So I think, and that's why I also think that we should be, as local governments or umbrella organizations, should be at the table. And lastly, I think that's also, how can we get awareness with our citizens? Because for them, and I often see that in my own communication, in my communication also as a city, we talk a lot about the SDGs. We try to translate that to their level, to how they feel what SDGs is, because it's quality of life that we are trying to give to them. But you can see that it's that we have to make sure that everybody is with us, that we don't leave somebody behind, and we have to make them inclusive. It's one of the most important SDGs, of course, an inclusive policy. How can you do that? And that is very important because we can't have the we cannot make the mistake by not involving everybody in our city, and that's a large challenge. A lot of people understand it and they are with us, but a lot of people don't understand it, and we have to bring them in because it's a story for everybody, not a story for just the happy few.
Thank you very much, Mayor Wim Dries. And now let me turn to Daphne. Daphne, I would have two of the questions for you. The first one, someone is asking how you facilitate, you being not BMZ only, but I guess many of the countries and institutions engaged in development cooperation, how you facilitate the information sharing and the dialogue with countries in Asia Pacific and subnational governments there. In particular, if you have some ideas of how some of the BMZ programs have featured that. And then there's a second question, which I know you've been dealing with as a hot potato, which is to say that often the problem that subnational governments have, or the shortcomings they have, is the lack of time and the lack of funding. And I know that BMZ has played a role in bridging some of the gaps related to the funding and the capacity, at least, to make sure this is not the bottleneck for action. If you can elaborate a bit more on these two in a minute or two.
Thank you very much. I will try my very best. Difficult questions, both of them. We do have an organization, Engagement Global, that has a service agency, Communities in One World. So we do have a special agency, let's say, to support cities and to some extent also regions in this kind of international exchange. They do offer counseling. We do offer through this agency financial support, so they can actually work together. They can implement projects. They can visit mutually. That also is visits from the Global South, where funds might be even harder to be had. But they also facilitate exchange through conferences, through seminars, so that we have a lot of knowledge sharing between the German municipalities, their partners in the Global South, and also the networks behind those. So we create this kind of networking effect. This also helps us to really engage them in, for example, our bilateral cooperation programs, whereby we do believe we can, leverage some of the funds, we can get a better impact, because we have not only a small local project, but we might, use it as a kind of pilot for a potential larger project in one area. We can qualify cities in the global south so that they can actually access funds, German or multilateral funds, through capacity building. And could you repeat the second question, because I think I didn't answer that yet.
Good. You want to go through the second one?
Would you mind to repeat it, because I think I have not answered it yet.
So the first question was really how you engage with subnational governments in Asia and Africa from the development cooperation, and the second one, which you've covered in terms of funding and capacity.
Okay, great. So then let's go to the first one. That is not easy, really. It largely depends on each individual country. German development cooperation is working a lot on decentralization. And in countries where we do have a bilateral decentralization program, it's easy to engage in exchange because we will simply set up the structures necessary. We have GIZ or KfW assisting us in supporting the network we are creating in this country. But we do also work on in this kind of ICLAI or other international networks that will help us engage with those actors, not nationally in their context, but more on the international in the international arena, where we have kind of like-minded groups, and where we have easy access to these actors. But we do also support, for example, the German Länder, the federal states, in exchanging with their peers in other countries and maybe setting up bilateral region-to-region partnerships, so that we do have this kind of exchange also on a subnational level.
Thank you very much for these responses, Daphne. And let me now turn to Julie from Flanders, and I'll direct two of the questions to you, if you can respond to them. The first one relates to the extent to which provinces have been associated to the design of the regional development strategy in Flanders. So I assume this relates to the other two regions, so Brussels, Capital Region, and Wallonia. If you can elaborate a bit more on how you've been sharing information or learning from each other within the context of Belgium, I think that would be insightful for many participants. And there's a second question on how you can move in a public administration from a top-down siloed types of governance to a more cross-cutting way of designing those plans and policies. And I know there's been a bit of innovation and experimentation in the region of Flanders. I thought you'd be better placed to tackle that one as well. Julie, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. With regard to the question on involving the provinces, in Belgium, the provinces are a government level between the region and the communities. So in that sense, we also have an association of Flemish provinces, as we have an association of the Flemish communities and cities represented here by Mr. Wim Dries. But the Association of Flemish Provinces has been involved in our approach to implementing the SDGs. We've had regular meetings with them in order to discuss what we are doing, which processes we are following, and how we can involve different government levels. Also in order to learn from each other, because the provinces are very ambitious and very driven to move forward to a very different and more sustainable society. So in that sense, we are trying to evolve them every step, and we will continue to do so in the future, because I think what is important is that this approach, this strategy is never ended. It is a process that we can continue to build on, and we listen to the needs of different stakeholders in that respect. And I think that also answers the second question, because if we really want to move ahead with the road to implementing the SDGs, it's not just a question of coordination on a more horizontal level, making sure that different political ministers are involved, making sure that they are all responsible. It's not just in the hand of one politician, it's in the hands of all of them. It's in the hand of different sectors that involve different stakeholders, private, public, you name it, but then definitely also involving all these different government levels. And in Flanders, we use these associations at first to make sure that we have them at a table and that we have a structural dialogue where we want to involve them. And just to mention it, it wasn't a question, but what we also did is that we, as Flanders, funded one of the UNITAR centers here in Belgium, here in Flanders, in Antwerp, the CIFAL Center, and it is there specifically to teach on SDGs, to teach on implementing the SDGs. And in the very near future, we will have a webinar with them, trying to make sure and have lessons learned on how we can monitor the implementation of the SDGs, how to best use indicators on all levels in order to make sure that we move ahead. So if you like to have that information shared as well, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you very much, Julie. And let me now turn to Norway. And for the questions of Norway, I will invite Linda to step in. And we've upgraded Linda as speaker to be able to respond to some of the questions. Linda, there are two questions that actually echo each other, which are more about how you've been working concretely to translate the SDGs from a global vision into local priorities. What did you do to make sense of the goals in your respective context? And if you can share a bit more information about the process that has brought the SDGs into your country specific, so let's say region specifics. And then probably a second question, which I know you've been paying a lot of attention, which is that of the negative trade-offs. And I know the planetary boundaries discussion that you've shaped in Norway for this sustainability agenda, were also meant to deal with some of those negative trade-offs. If you can very briefly, we have 5 minutes left for two last interventions, elaborate a bit on this. So are we having Linda maybe step in, or?
Yep.
Yes, Linda, you have the floor.
Hi. When it comes to adapting the SDGs to the local and regional agenda, we had to start. We were so fortunate that we could start with that in the process of building our new region and making our new regional planning strategy, which is sort of the mother of all plans, as we call it, for the counties in Norway. And what we first did was that we realized we needed to build some knowledge. So we made a regional knowledge base where we looked at the goals and indicators and tried to find statistics that were relevant for that, for our new region, and also for the different municipalities in our region. So we could display both our progress on the different goals and that of the different municipalities, to see also the differences within our counties and where we had the biggest challenges on topics. And we made this into a document where we also compared this and put it into a global and national agenda, so that you could see how it all relates to each other. And on top of that, we made also a database of statistics that the municipalities could use in that. And so we've been working on that when we were building our new data to put it into make the SDGs relevant in our work regionally. We have tried as much as possible to implement it into everything else that we do. That is, the work with SDGs is not the project that comes on top of everything else. It's integrated in all we do in our work with the whole planning and governing system for Viken, in our leadership and management, leadership and employee training. To build, we have made a network throughout our organization, so that we have ambassadors on all different levels and sectors to both talk about the SDGs and be motivators for that there, but also to give us input on how we can use the SDGs practically within infrastructure projects, within commercial development and culture and all our different sectors. So that's been very important to us. And also, in our planning strategy, we have used the SDGs quite fundamentally to create, and also especially the framework, the matrix framework from the report that's called The Future Is Now, that came in 2019, where you look at different, not the SDGs by themselves, but in a system, but entry points and levels to try to create a holistic networks. And we made our goals and strategies in our planning strategy according to that, and trying to now follow them up in the more concrete plans for area and mobility, business and education, and living conditions and participation. So this is it's all in progress, but it's I think we are making good progress with this. When it comes to the
I'll invite you to wrap up, Linda, please, so we can finish on time. Please go ahead.
No, so and the whole into all this, the whole trade or negative and positive trade-offs is very, very important. And also that this is we want this to be addressed in everything that we do, that everyone that works with sustainability goals work with all the dimensions, and that especially the planetary boundaries are taken into consideration.
Thank you very much, Linda Duffy, responsible for the SDGs in the County of Viken. And let me now turn back to Bo for the last two questions, Bo, that I will submit to you on behalf of the region of Southern Denmark. There's a question on the methods that have proven successful in different cities and regions to heighten awareness and to involve residents and local stakeholders in the planning. And that's something you've been doing in Southern Denmark. And there's a second question, which was originally targeting Germany, which I think is equally relevant for Denmark, about the role of private companies in contributing to local SDGs. This is a full part of the analysis of the Southern Denmark report, the role of business to go beyond CSR and to really use the SDG also as a market opportunity. So Bo, maybe if you can cover very briefly in 1 minute and a half max, those two questions, and then we'll move to the next session.
Yes, I will try. I think for both of these, it's really about thinking about partnerships in a broad context. In terms of involving citizens, when we developed our strategy, we had conferences a couple of times where citizens were invited to contribute and participate and make their voices heard. So involvement, I think, is it starts and ends with an involvement. And in terms of the private sector cooperation, it's again about that we as a region and with the municipalities, we involve ourselves in concrete projects with private enterprise. For example, this happens in the educational area, where we have partnerships in the city of Sønderborg and with the University of Southern Denmark and some of the local companies regarding development of new education opportunities and things like that. And just maintaining a constant dialogue, seeking out opportunities for cooperating among different stakeholders. That's really being an open organization towards cooperation. I think that's very broad, but I think that's where our emphasis really lies, sort of building the foundation for partnerships.
Good. Thank you very much, Bo, and thank you all for being very concise. We're almost on time. That's good to know. And I'm delighted to now close this first panel of the roundtable. Thank you for the questions. There are a few that we didn't get a chance to respond to. There's a question about data and whether cities or regions have performed or not. Maybe the team can put online the link to the synthesis synthesis report that shows really the data for the overall sample of 600 cities and 600 regions that we've looked at in terms of SDGs performance, and where we see that at least 70% of the cities have not reached 15 of the 17 goals, and 80% of the regions have not reached any of the goals. So that really draws the alarm in terms of how much we're not on track yet in the decade that is left. There's a question on the links with other streams of work on circular economy SDGs, which I'll keep for the last part of the roundtable. Stefano will be doing a wrap up and can touch up on these. And for the rest, I invite really the speakers to respond online to the extent possible, share links, and we'll try to the extent possible to address some of the remaining questions later in the roundtable. Let me close here and hand over to my colleagues, Robin Ogilvy, our permanent representative in New York. Robin, if you have the floor, you can take over from here. Do we have Robin online? Yes.
Morning, Ziza.
Excellent. Go ahead, Robin.
I was promised that we were going to have a break this morning, but as they say, no rest for the wicked, and I guess you would like us to continue right away, right?
This is actually true. Stefano, I'm in your hands here. Are we having a 5-minute virtual break?
If we want, we can do that Zoom poll.
I'm ready to go if you are.
I think it's up to Robin. If you're ready to start, we can start, because there was a Zoom poll, sorry, a Mentimeter poll, but if we are a bit late, we can do it.
Okay, let's do the Mentimeter then. If Lawrence and Aline, you can show that on the screen, it will be a good warm-up for Robin and give us a sense.
In your hands.
So we invite you to access the Mentimeter in two ways. Either you have a smartphone, which seems to be the case for the majority, and what you have is just to click to flash the code, and that takes you directly to the web page. Here it is. I do it in parallel to make sure it works. And the question is, which words would you use to describe the role of cities and regions in the decade of action? You have the possibility to include 3 keywords. So we leave the slide with the flash code for a while, and then we will drop the slide once everybody had a chance to connect and share the screen. So Stefano or whoever is handling, maybe we can put the screen and see what the responses look like. Okay, good. So crucial, essential, facilitator, change, fundamental, inclusion. We're talking to convinced people here. It's good to see. Thank you very much. I think this sets the scene. Cities and regions as a catalyst for change. We'll let you continue maybe for a few more seconds, and meanwhile, let me now pass over officially to Robin. Robin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Aziza, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. My name is Robin Ogilvy, and I'm the special representative and a permanent observer to the UN of the OECD. I'm based here in New York. And it's my great pleasure to moderate this session on coordinating voluntary local and national reviews. This session follows actually a side event that we held during this year's high-level political forum in July on a similar topic. And its aim is to discuss how better to align and reconcile national and local voluntary reviews for a more effective multi-level governance of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is important for 3 reasons. First, as our colleagues mentioned in the previous session, cities and regions play a key role in the achievement of the SDGs. In fact, on the graphic you just showed there, Aziza, essential was the big word right in the middle of our screen. So it's clear that we need to leverage the full potential of subnational governments in the decade of action, which we're now entering. Otherwise, at least 2/3 of the targets simply won't be reached. Now, despite this, cities and regions are not very much engaged by their national governments in their voluntary national, also Stefano and the team tell me. In fact, according to data prepared by UCLG, only 38% of countries, that was 18 out of 47, formally engaged their local and regional governments in the preparation of their VNRs last year. Second, cities have begun to develop their own voluntary local reviews to assess their efforts on the SDGs. New York City was the first to prepare its VLR in 2018, and it was soon followed by many others. Kitakyushu, Toyama, Shimokawa in Japan, Los Angeles here in the US, Helsinki in Finland, Bonn in Germany, Bristol in the UK, Cascais in Portugal, Buenos Aires in Argentina, and many, many others. National governments are not always involved in these processes. And there is therefore a huge potential to reconcile these voluntary national and local processes to improve the linkages between the two, ultimately the sustainability of these efforts at all levels of government. Third, we need granular data to monitor progress on the SDGs and to produce evidence-based VNRs and VLRs. National averages simply aren't enough. We need indicators, we need tools that allow us to document and address within countries the territorial disparities, the inequalities in the achievement of the 2030 agenda. And this is why, for example, at the OECD, we developed a localized indicator framework for the SDGs and a web tool that over 400 cities and over 400 regions in OECD countries are using to measure progress on the SDGs. And we very much hope that this tool can support subnational governments in preparing their VLRs and national governments in better documenting the disparities in their VNRs. So our session today includes the director of the UN DESA, that's the Department for Economic and Social Affairs division here, following very closely the 17 SDGs, the VNR processes, and the team there has also started to provide guidance on VLRs. We'll also have a distinguished colleague from the first state to prepare a VLR, that's Pará in Brazil. Two cities that have developed VLRs, so that's Helsinki and Bonn, a national government that's increasingly working on the localization of the SDGs, Norway, and finally, our distinguished colleague from the European Commission, who have developed a handbook for VLRs. So without further ado, and what I'll do, if it's okay with you, I'll introduce each of our speakers one by one, otherwise it's a lot to take in all at the beginning. And afterwards, we've allowed time for a panel discussion with the front-runner cities, regions, countries, and institutions. So without further ado, it's my great honor and privilege to hand over to our first speaker, who is sat, albeit virtually, right across the street from me here in New York. He is Alexander Trepelkov. Mr. Trepelkov has spent now more than 30 years at the UN Secretariat. I remember him very well from a previous role as director in charge of financing for development, another area in which we partner very closely at the OECD. Today, he is director of the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, the Department for Economic and Social Affairs. The division acts as the global secretariat for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They play a leading role in providing substantive support around the SDGs and in building partnerships for SDG implementation. So I'll hand straight over to Mr. Trepelkov now for his keynote speech. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin. Distinguished participants, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wish to thank OECD and the County of Viken in Norway for co-organizing this timely event on a territorial approach to the SDGs as a framework for long-term COVID-19 recovery strategies. I would also like to commend the front-runner cities and regions for their commitment to localizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development across various levels of government and stakeholders. At this session, it is my great pleasure to present the perspective of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs on coordinating voluntary local and national reviews to strengthen the multi-level governance of the SDGs. 5 years into the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, there is a growing concern that momentum towards achieving its 17 goals is slowing down. To accelerate progress in the decade of action and delivery, cities and regions have a crucial role to play in leveraging the full potential of the SDGs as a policy tool to improve people's lives. In the political declaration of the 2019 United Nations SDG Summit, heads of state and government recognized the critical role of cities, local authorities, and communities in realizing the SDGs and committed to empowering and supporting them in pursuing the 2030 Agenda. As the Global Secretariat of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, UNDESA is deeply committed to ensuring robust monitoring and review of progress in SDG implementation at all levels. In this context, we have witnessed that the subnational reviews, also known as the voluntary local reviews, are picking up pace. It shows the encouraging trend of increasing ownership of the SDGs by all stakeholders at the regional and local levels. While the VLRs are not directly mandated by the 2030 Agenda, these reviews have proven useful to drive localizing and accelerating SDG implementation. They can also serve as a remarkable collection of concrete examples of lessons learned and successful experiences. For the cities and regions, the VLR process can bring multiple benefits, such as support more integrated policymaking and coordination within the government, serve as a catalyst for increased engagement with civil society, the private sector and academia, help enhance data collection, serve as a communication tool between different levels of government, and facilitate the search for new and innovative means of implementation. The COVID-19 pandemic has further underscored the crucial role of municipalities as first responders and providers of essential public services. Local and regional governments around the world have taken rapid actions in preventing and mitigating the spread of the virus and in addressing the socioeconomic effects of the pandemic. Against the backdrop of the overall adverse impact of the pandemic on SDG implementation globally, its effects vary among and within countries and regions. This underscores the importance of impact assessment at the local and regional levels to devise appropriate targeted response and recovery measures and to make requisite adjustments to longer-term sustainability strategies. Both national and local reviews have an important role to play in this regard. UNDESA has from the start supported the voluntary national reviews and organized peer learning workshops for the countries participating in this process annually. We are also committed to providing similar capacity building support at the subnational level, aimed at leveraging the full potential of cities and regions to meet the SDGs. Our first global capacity building workshop for the local reviews, held online in June, brought together cities and regions that had already conducted a local review to share their experiences with those who only start the journey. At the same workshop, experts from national governments shared their experiences from the VNR process. We are continuing this work through our thematic VLR series, providing peer learning opportunities on topics such as stakeholder engagement, incorporating the SDGs into subnational plans, strategies and budgets, data and monitoring, and institutional arrangements. While there is no official format for the local reviews, we have learned from the national level processes that certain shared elements drawn from the 2030 Agenda itself can enrich the peer learning and contribute to the robustness of the reviews. Hence, we have developed a set of global guiding elements for the VLRs, which draw upon the United Nations Secretary General's common voluntary guidelines for the VNRs. These elements seek to provide a potential structure for the local reports and at minimum give a checklist of issues that could be reflected in the process even if they are not showcased in the report itself. The elements are not meant to be prescriptive or restrictive, but rather serve as a tool for those engaging in these reviews. They also aim at fostering a dialogue and attaining better alignment and integration between the voluntary national and local reviews. As the Secretariat of the High-Level Political Forum, we have seen that an increasing number of national level reviews refer to meaningful collaboration with subnational governments. And this year, for the first time, also to the VLRs. Reviews at the national and subnational levels contribute to fostering mutual collaboration and reinforcing vertical coherence. For the national governments, the local reviews can provide a much fuller picture of progress and gaps in SDG implementation. Local reviews can also showcase unique but scalable solutions to existing challenges. They can also help in assessing and addressing geographical inequalities within a country. Cities and regions can also support meaningful stakeholder engagement for the national reviews and SDG implementation at large. Municipalities can expand communication with civil society, private companies, and communities. They can also reach out to the most vulnerable and marginalized groups and help amplify their voices. Evidence of direct contributions by cities and regions to SDG implementation feature in several VNRs and our SDG acceleration actions and good practices databases. Let me give a few examples. In Japan, the city of Kita-Kyushu has developed an eco-town project to promote cooperation with cities in Asia on waste management. In its voluntary national review this year, Finland highlighted that 45% of its population lives in municipalities that have committed to carbon neutrality by 2030. In Colombia, the city of Bogota has launched a district care system implemented through blocks of care to increase access to care services. The city of Henk in Belgium has launched the urban matchmaking service system, mobilizing some 500 volunteers to meet the social needs of the city, focusing on the most vulnerable. In Brazil, the city of Fortaleza provides safe and sustainable vegetables for the elderly using semi-hydroponic gardens where beneficiaries are involved in planning and harvesting. In closing, I wish to emphasize that local government associations, city networks, think tanks, regional actors, and international organizations such as the United Nations system and OECD have an important role to play in supporting the local authorities in their efforts for accelerating and localizing SDG implementation. We look forward to working together with all interested entities to ensure that the voluntary local reviews fulfill their promise as a flexible and useful tool for promoting SDG implementation at the subnational level, and that the lessons learned in cities and regions around the world are duly shared at the national, regional, and global levels. Thank you. Over, back to you, Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Trebokov. Thank you for this rich introduction to the voluntary local reviews. You emphasized their role as communication tools, their role in pulling together and putting, shedding light on an evidence base, on geographical inequalities, on stakeholder engagement, and on many, many other dimensions of these emerging reviews. So it's great that we have now a panel of senior figures who have themselves committed to or are currently undertaking these reviews to tell us about their experiences. But before we do that, I'd like to do a quick poll and ask the question of our participants today. Very simple question. Have you been engaged in a voluntary local review or a voluntary national review in the past, or are you planning to participate in one in the near future? This is a yes/no question. So have you been engaged in a VLR or a VNR in the past, or are you planning to do so in the near future? All you need to do is select yes or no from the two options that appear on your screen now. We'll wait just one moment for everyone to respond, and we'll see the result. I'm told that almost everyone has responded. We're just going to wait a few more seconds.
Okay, it looks like it's
colleagues in Paris. I think we can. I think everyone's voted. Tell us the result. Not bad, not bad. So 50-50. About half of you are already engaged or have engaged in a local or national review in the future. But that's also great because it means that half of our colleagues are here to learn from others and are thinking about it further down the road. So thank you for setting the scene with this poll. I'd like to go straight now to our first panelist today, Mr. Helder Barbalho, who is the governor of the state of Pará in Brazil. His state developed a voluntary local review earlier this year. I'm always struck, Mr. Barbalho, by when we work with the states in Brazil, by the sheer scale of the operations that you run as governors. Your own state has a population of about 8 million. That's roughly the size of Switzerland, but spread over an area about 30 times the size of Switzerland. So you're implementing at the subnational level an agenda really on a scale that that for many would be the size of an entire country. And I'm just fascinated by this, and I'm really looking forward to hear about your experiences. Mr. Barbalho is going to intervene in Portuguese, so I give you all 1 moment on the interpretation button to select English. So on Zoom, if you look at the bottom right, you'll have a button that says interpretation, and you may select English should you wish to listen to Mr. Barbalho's message in English. So without further ado, Mr. Barbalho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Robin. Thanks a lot for inviting me for Pará States participate about this discussion. I would like talk in Portuguese and translator, Ambassador Mr. Everton. That's okay?
Very good. Please go ahead.
Ok. Bom dia. Agradeço ao OCDE pelo convite.
For the invitation and congratulated for its leadership in mobilizing subnational governments towards implementation of Agenda 2030, as well as monitoring its progress through the territorial approach to the SDGs. Okay. Continue. Governador, pode continuar.
A cidade de Barcarena,
The city of Barcarena,
no estado do Pará,
in the state of Pará,
no Brasil, por ter institucionalizado
is an example in Brazil of the adoption of the UN development agendas, especially the Millennium Development Goals, and later in later Agenda 2030. Barcarena was first mentioned in OECD program in 2017. It was the first subnational government in Brazil to publish a progress report on Agenda 2030 that year. Agenda 2030 is an important planning and management tool. The government of the state of Pará is also
está institucionalizando
also incorporating the agenda into its policies. We expect to the
início dos novos mandatos
the start of the term of newly elected mayors in January is a great opportunity to do so.
De oportunidades para isso. O relatório local
volunteer report published by the government of the state of Pará last September details the initial phase of this arrangement.
Neste relatório,
the report introduces the Amazon Now State Plan, an integrated public policy to promote sustainable development by fostering local economy and preserving the forest.
Da floresta. Tais relatórios são
These reports are essential to give visibility to the performance of subnational governments
que têm se engajado
in the implementation of Agenda 2030 in Brazil.
diferentes níveis
the levels of governance and multi-sectoral partnerships are strategic pillars for the implementation of Agenda 2030. Dialogue and cooperation between decision makers and various partners are essential to the success of the agreed targets. Initiatives such as this one by OECD provide knowledge and tools for the coordination of several key actors. These are therefore crucial. They are a process of rebuilding back a better, fairer, and egalitarian society where no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barballo, for your remarks. Thank you for sharing your experiences from Pará with us. I'm going to move straight on to our next speaker today, who is no stranger to us, Sana Marie Yanti, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives in the Mayor's Office of the City of Helsinki of Finland. And she's going to explain a bit what they've been doing in Helsinki. And I remember we met only a few months ago in July during the high-level political forum, at which your Prime Minister also participated and presented the voluntary national review of Finland. So Sana Marie, if I may, tell us about your experience in coordinating with national government in this process. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Such a pleasure to be here and be talking to you again about these subjects. I know we had very many good conversations about this. Seems like ages ago now, though. Very happy to be here and share our story. Like you said, we were very proud to, for the very first time in our VLR journey, to really connect and make tangible our relationship with the national review this summer, when Prime Minister Sanna Marin was presenting the Finnish National Review, which was the second review Finnish state has done. We are in preparation of the second voluntary local review here in Helsinki, and we are very proud to see how we are able to evolve and develop that process. Come next summer, we plan to publish our second voluntary local review in May. As you probably all know, we were the second city in the world to engage in the voluntary local review almost 3 years ago now, after the city of New York. And the very first review for us was mainly a tool for 3 reasons. We were searching for a strategic tool that would help and allow us to find a way to make visible and really focus on our journey towards the Agenda 2030 success. We did a lot of work. A lot of that was embedded in other things we were doing as far as city strategy. We had a lot of connection points to engaging with the agenda, and we were really working hard on creating SDG success. But there was no collective tool, there was no collective reporting system in place that would really help us shed light and communicate how we engaged with the agenda and how much success and in some cases failure we were doing with our work. The second reason for us to engage with the voluntary local review was communications. We really needed a common language and a tool and a framework to have these conversations with other cities, but also have this conversation with our national government. And the third was to really engage with the whole organization. It's been a very much a mayoral level activity and a project here in Helsinki, but what has been really important is to bring along the whole organization. So it's not only about creating a framework to talk to other cities or the United Nations or the national government, but it's also a framework to talk to our people internally and really make their work's connection with the Agenda 2030 reality, and really bringing all those action points and all those activities together. And that, I think, was the success of the first voluntary local review. Now, during that year, when we published our first review, there was approximately, I think there was 10 cities doing it at the same time. There were great leadership showing from Japan, Bonn did amazing work. Bristol was really strong with their review, as well as Los Angeles, which did incredible job with their review and the connection to their budget. And New York was very supportive for all of us, of course. But I think this second time around, it's much different because we now have over 200 cities who are working towards a voluntary local review, and hundreds of more cities who are thinking about it. So I think in 2 years of time, it really became a global movement. And I think that shapes and shifts the way cities are working with the voluntary local review, because now it really becomes a global language and helps us with a lot of things that we never thought would be possible, like having these conversations so closely together with the United Nations, for example. So I think moving forward, what we are searching for in our second voluntary local review is fun. I think there's been a lot of serious talk about the Agenda 2030. There is a lot of very important messaging and language out there, but we're still struggling to find that real connection with people. And I think if individual people are not committed and not understanding their role in the Agenda 2030 implementation process, it's really never going to become a reality. And that's why it's so important for us to really now try to create a language and a bridge from what we're trying to establish to how people interact with the SDGs. And this is something we're really diving into in our second voluntary local review this year and next year. I also want to point out one final thing, which I think is so important and we really cherish here in Helsinki together with New York, is that this whole process for cities as pragmatic and human-centric, agile creatures, is that we really want it to be about action and implementation, not about reviews. So review is a tool for delivery. And that's a really important message that we share with all cities. It's not about creating beautiful catalogs or great apps for our generous reviews, but it is really a tool for strategy, tool for delivery, and tool for communication so that we can get to those targets and deliver those goals by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanna Marie, for bringing those perspectives from Helsinki. You spoke again. I'm seeing common themes already with the remarks of our first speakers, on the role of evidence, on the role of news as a communication tool or framework, including communication with a national government. Great to hear that this movement has now grown to some 200 cities. This is no longer a small experiment. It's really going mainstream. And that's really fantastic to hear. I'm going to go straight to our next speaker, who is from another European city, the city of Bonn. Ms. Verena Schwart is from the Department of International Affairs and Global Sustainability in Bonn. And she's going to tell us about the VLR that Bonn launched just now in October this year, last month, and the role that it's been playing, or how it's been working with the German federal government on the localization of the SDGs. So over to you, Verena.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Good afternoon. In Germany, it's good afternoon. So all from my side. I had prepared a small presentation. I don't know if the OECD team can set it up. Yeah, thank you. I think we are pretty much in the same role as Helsinki. Of course, Helsinki has been before, and Helsinki has been in the good position that its national government had a presentation at this year's HLPF. That's something that we are looking at very much for 2021, because in 2021, Germany is doing its next voluntary national review. Next slide, please. Next, please. If we look a little bit, what is the framework or the basis on which Bonn developed this voluntary local review, which just came out in October, as Robin mentioned. Our overall guiding framework is our sustainability strategy that was developed in the context of the SDGs, and that's bringing together all the different concepts and strategic plans that contribute to SDG implementation in Bonn on the local level. That's the framework that was developed in a lengthy participatory process and adopted in 2019. We had a long-term sustainability reporting, but it was a mere indicator report. It now has a lot more increased focus on the SDGs. And we are now looking also a lot on our work in international networks, where we want to work together on raising the role of the cities in SDG implementation. We heard from ICLEI before. We mentioned the network that New York City started. Next slide, please. If we look into what were our objectives for developing a VLR, it is very closely linked to our sustainability strategy. It's a monitoring tool directly for the strategic objectives that we have set ourselves. It creates an interlinkage between political strategies and the indicator-based reporting, which was not there before. Of course, it's a very strong communication tool. And if you look into the report, you will see that we used a lot of graphics to make this dry indicator reporting more engaging and more visible and telling the message. But of course, it's also for us a tool to demonstrate the crucial role of local governments for the implementation of the Agenda 2030 on an international level. Now, next slide, please. If you look into the resources that we could build on for the developing of the VLR, in Germany, there is a municipal SDG indicator set that was developed based on an initiative by the Association of German Cities with a lot of other city networks that were stakeholders in that. We also, of course, learned a lot from the in-depth look into the indicator development that took place in the OECD program, and the SDG monitoring tool that was developed. It was also very inspiring to hear from other pilots. For us, Kitakyushu, which had presented the VLR, was a very interesting case for us. Also, the network of VLR cities under the lead of New York City that we joined this year, and that shows a bit the strengths that when cities unite, how powerful the voice can become. And what we see also is that currently we're working on a process to introduce sustainability criteria in our budget planning process. And there it all connects because we're looking into the same indicators. Next slide, please, which gives you a look into the Bonn's first VLR. Next slide, please. It's structured along the 6 priority areas of our sustainability strategy. So it's very directly linked to the objectives that we have set in Bonn, to use it as a tool also on the local level that has direct links to what we're doing. Next, it's highlighting trends along the 46 indicators. You can see there's a traffic light system that shows the trends going into green, red, or yellow direction. It gives references to the direct SDG impacts. Next slide, please. And it includes at the end a status report for each of the focal areas, so you can see very clearly where we are standing within the city. Next slide, please. So with the VLR, we want to really call for coordinating VLRs with VNRs. I think the words from Daphne Gross-Jansen in the first session were very encouraging in that respect. As the OECD always cites, it's 65% of the SDG sub-goals that will not be reached without the engagement of the cities and regions. And we do believe that VLRs are a very useful instrument to create visibility for these local contributions, and also to mainstream them with the subnational and national efforts. And as such, they can lay the foundation for genuine participation and really have a specific view on what the cities are actually doing, and to involve the cities in the multi-level decision-making process. Next slide, please. And so I think the national government has set a lot of impulses for SDG implementation on the SDG level. We heard a bit of that from Daphne Gross-Jansen also, who enabled us, the BMZ and Engagement Global actually enabled us to participate in this OECD program and to take the opportunity of having a lot of discussions in this network. But we do believe that the vertical coordination for implementing, measuring, and monitoring the SDGs can still be strengthened by directly engaging German cities and municipalities in national processes, and thus promote the vertical coordination. I think that's something that you can also read in the case study on Bonn in the OECD report. And we think that Germany's VNR for 2021 is a good opportunity to involve cities in a more systematic way. We engage very much in international networks with this. We had a very strong panel during the Equally Daring Cities, together with the city of New York, the German ambassador to the UN DESA was involved, UCLG, who all advocated for stronger involvement of the cities in the VNR process and called for an inclusive multilateralism. And right now we're working at the national level with the German Council for Sustainable Development, as well as the Association of German Cities, and trying to address different ministries with a view to Germany's VNR next year. Thank you, that's all from my side. Happy to hear more from other people.
Thank you so much, Verena. Thank you for these beautiful visuals. I have one request. It's just a request from me, not from the OECD. I hope that these slides can be circulated because I just find particularly these visuals on showing sort of progress and the monitoring framework to be incredibly powerful. So if there's a way that we could circulate the slides, I'm sure that others would benefit from them. But again, we heard some of the same messages here: the importance of evidence, the role of the VLR process in promoting vertical coordination. I really hope to see this evidence and these insights shine in next year's voluntary national review of Germany. So if any of my colleagues at the permanent mission of Germany here in New York are following us, you're being watched. We want to hear more about Bonn, and we hope that these examples come through in next year's voluntary review. And so while I'm thinking about how national governments pull this rich evidence base in, it's a great transition to our next speaker, who is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway. Mr. Inge Herman Rydland is a special envoy for the 2030 agenda in the government of Norway, and he's going to provide us with a national perspective on Norway's VNR and on the relevance of involving local actors. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. I have also a slide presentation. There it is. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting Norway also from the ministry point of view. We have already heard this morning from the Minister of Local Government and 2 other interventions from Viken and from KS. So we are very pleased to have this ability to talk and this chance to talk. We think there is nothing more we can do of importance now than to lift this agenda high, and we would like to see it being the game changer the local environment, but the global community needs. So can we go to the slides, please? Well, I have been just roll down the slides so I can take it all together. We were first 2016, we started, and we were actually one of the 22. The VNR in 2016 was coordinated by my ministry, and I had the pleasure to be part of that process. And it's interesting to see the development we have gone through. At that time, it was very much focused on the SDGs, limited attention to targets, and indicators were still in the making. So we have gone a long way, and we have actually come a long way to make the presentations that I have seen today that I find very impressive. The commitment from the regional and the cities are really, really something to take note of. The 2016 VNR pointed out Norway also have challenges, and if you can see the red on the right, that are some areas that we like to revisit now, as our second presentation will come next July. And we think, as our Prime Minister clearly has said, when it comes to the 2030 agenda, we are all developing countries. And I think that is what sets it so importantly apart from the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. This agenda points at us. And we have seen now in Norway that that is really taking hold. Can we go to the next place? So how do we do it? Well, the government have decided to have a national coordination in the local Minister of Local Government, and we met the minister this morning. The international coordination is with my ministry, and that means that we have to work together. The administrative forum established by the government is actually a civil servant forum that meets regularly. We are meeting next week to see where are Norway generally on this implementation. The most important one is a state secretary forum that has a main purpose to anchor the agenda politically and to guide the work. And then another issue that hasn't been said very much about in this presentation so far this morning, the policy coherence issue. I think there is a broad consensus in Norway now that what you do nationally has importance, what you do in the international fora, like my German colleague from Bonn mentioned briefly. So the policy coherence issue is now a very prominent issue from the Norwegian side. And we have therefore a forum where this is being discussed with broad participation from across the society. Next, please. Yes. Now, we like to think that VNR is more than a report. And I think it is very important that the VNR highlight is not something that happens in the HLPF. It is basically what happens before that is important. And we now see that the coordination with the Minister of Local Government and Minister of Foreign Affairs forces us to think a little bit differently, to see the national and international in context. And in that perspective, I think what I've heard today about the VLR is so important. And thank you, Finland, for lifting this up, because I think this is such a good lesson for us to think of. We have plenty of cities who are working on these things now, but we have not coined it in the VLR context yet, but that is definitely something that we like to do. Now, Auditor General in Norway, as part of the Intosai cooperation, has actually made a system revision of the entire national implementation of the agenda. I'm sure there may be others on this broadcast today that has had the same experience. For us, it was an eye-opener, and it kind of connected the dots between the political expectations of the parliament and actually what is happening in the country, nationally and internationally. We had also planned a national conference, Road Towards 2030, and you can see the small little green part up there, that's Norway. We had to put it off until February for reasons that you all probably can guess. But the point is, it triggers the agenda in a special way, decade for action and delivery. And I think that is something that we see now is more important than any time. We are very short on time to make this. But more importantly, the conference is also meant to give us an emphasis on the agenda as a national project. And I think that is where we have seen now the greatest progress. Next, please. So we like to think that if we shall succeed with the VNR, we need to have everyone on board. And that's why it is more than a report. We need regions, counties, and cities, and so forth. And you can see the list there. And indeed, what we see is that these are on board. There is a tremendous development taking place in the society the last 2-3 years. And we see now that major cities and counties are now like Viken, for example, the region has taken this on board in a very, very constructive way. And we are very pleased to see this. We think it has to do with the understanding in the public. And if the understanding is good, we can also easily also defend how this connection between the national and international is so important. The initial rounds of consultations for the white paper that is going to the parliament in early next year has been conducted, and all the entities mentioned above has been involved in these consultations, and we think we can use those consultations to build on the VNR process that is now being cast. Next, please. Well, we like to think that you're all in the same boat, and there are 4 issues we like to point at that I think we think and we kind of remind ourselves of frequently. There must be a consensus about a common purpose, and I think, you know, from a kind of difficult start, we see more and more now that the common purpose is now being owned by a continuously larger number of Norwegians. And I think that is very good. The public survey we have made shows that 60% plus are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, number 2, access to reliable data. We are very concerned about the issue about the data, because if we don't have the data, we can't proceed. The Norwegian Statistical Bureau has now developed a site, and we are having access to it. Everyone can read it in English. And it's the first shot that we have made, and it's being developed now. And we think that this database will be very important for the national VLR process, but also for the VNR, which is, of course, will focus on the overall national implementation. Now, using the boat metaphor, we need to agree on the map to use. National indicators, complementary to global indicators, is a rather big process now. We are trying to think, what do we need in Norway to measure the progress that we are speaking of, and how can we make it evident in the VNR? Finally, it's very decisive. There must be clear guidance from the bridge. This is not a technical exercise. We like to think of it as a very and highly political exercise. And I think that's why we are very happy to have a State Secretary Forum in Norway that is guiding the civil service into the political arena where we can actually work on these issues together. So that's where we are now. And this will now kind of float into a white paper process and a plan of action that will be submitted to the Parliament. And that is the way we want to anchor it prior to the VNR completion in May. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Inga. What a beautiful analogy, with sailing. Thank you for these. Thank you for these insights. I think that your Prime Minister may actually be responsible for something. The quote that you put on the first slide is one that our Secretary General seized in a meeting with her, and I've heard him repeat it in every meeting on the SDGs the last 5 years now. But it's sure, when it comes to implementing the SDGs, we're certainly all developing countries, or certainly all in the same boat, if I were to use your metaphor. Thank you so much for sharing Norway's experience with us. And I just pulled up this wonderful Norwegian database on my second screen here. Do have a look, colleagues. It's really fantastic. Just such a wealth of evidence on there, and it's beautifully presented. I'm going to go straight to our final speaker on this panel, Ms. Alice Siragusa. Alice is a project leader at the European Commission Joint Research Center, and she's going to tell us about how the Joint Research Center's handbook for VLRs, and she's going to provide her perspective on the importance of coordinating VLRs with national processes. So without further ado, Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. I think it's very inspiring. I will briefly like to touch 3 points: what we have been doing at the JRC in the last couple of years, what we are doing now, and some reflections on how to move on. Of course, the European Commission has taken a strong commitment toward the SDGs, and with the new Commission, this commitment has been reinforced. One example really recent is the new structure of the European semester, which is built around the SDGs. And I think in terms of national level and then national implementation, this is a very strong political message, coming back to the previous speaker. But as a Joint Research Center, so the in-house science service of the European Commission, what we have been focused on was in particular on the localization processes. And we have been working on 2 main actions. One is the adaptation of the smart specialization strategies method for STI roadmap for SDGs, so more on the methodological for innovation strategies, and one on the local monitoring that you mentioned before. The main output of this work that lasted a couple of years was trying to develop, in the meantime, when many cities were already developing the first VLRs, was really to try to look at what indicators were already available, harmonized with scientific methodologies that could help and in a way lift the burden of small cities with less statistical capacity to really start with working with reliable information and knowledge when assessing their achievement. So what we have been doing was to collect a number of examples for all SDGs of indicators that are already available to measure all the SDGs, both officials coming from several sources, but also experimental ones, because we really felt that at the time, but even now, there is a need to adapt the framework to the local situation and really to try to tackle the local issues. And in some cases, official statistics or the indicators that belong to the UN framework or even the Eurostat framework didn't fit for the purpose. And there was a need to add more. Of course, we really welcome the effort also of OECD to provide a platform where some of these indicators are already available to serve for the cities. What we are working on now, we are working with a number of cities to test the use of the handbook and to really see what are the indicators that are more used or in which area we need to improve. But of course, we continue our work in terms of scientific support to develop new indicators, to make recalculation, to refine the methodologies. This is very important, as I told you before, because in many cases, there is a need to improve the capacity of the cities and to provide a minimum guidance, let's say a common framework. This is why we really welcome also the recent published UN DESA guidelines, because we think that if the national governments has to take on board the local contribution, having an harmonized approach and a common approach, at least as a basis, as a backbone, could really help. In particular, I appreciated the quotation, the quote from Mr. Reindland, that VNR is more than a report. Of course, also VLR is more than a report, and we definitely agree that there is not only the need of have flashy indicators or figures, but to build a process that in which the stakeholders, the local stakeholders are engaged, but definitely having a support from international organizations as OECD, as the European Commission could really help, providing also platform for sharing knowledge and information. From our part, we will continue to work from the scientific point of view and the knowledge support to really help European cities and exchange it also with other cities in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you, dear colleagues. I'm told that we have about 10 minutes left for questions and answers. You should feel free to put them in the questions in the Q&A box there on your screen, and I'll ask all of our participants to help us answer them. The governor of Pará had to leave us, but I'm told that one of his colleagues is on the line. So if there are any questions addressed to him, we'll do our best to get answers for you. And I wonder if we might begin with the question presented by Kadia El Houdi. To what extent should VLRs be aligned with VNRs? Do we need specific guidelines for VLRs depending on the country's development? If Mr. Trepelkov is still with us, I wonder if we might have your perspectives on this one, as your department really sees the full breadth of the 193 member states of the UN and the wide ranges of country and local contexts. So the question again was, to what extent do VLRs and VNRs need to be aligned? And second, do we need specific guidelines for voluntary local reviews depending on the level of development of a country? Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much, Robin, and thank you very much for the question. My short answer to this question is, to the extent the national government deems it appropriate. The point is that voluntary national reviews are country-driven, country-led, and voluntary processes. So we are not in the business of establishing straitjacket, very strict rules and restrictions. As you know, there are guidelines for the voluntary national reports that have been developed a few years ago. Now, most recently, UNDESA, in consultation with several stakeholders at the global, regional, and local level, produced a document which is now available on our website. It is titled Global Guiding Elements for Voluntary Local Reviews of SDG Implementation. So I briefly described it in my presentation, so I'm not going to do it now. But the point is that the objective is to bring better coherence, consistency, comparability into the process. But again, I want to emphasize that these are just guiding elements, and the purpose is actually to enhance the contribution of local authorities, cities, and regions to achieve the results as has been emphasized by several speakers after me. Thank you. Over. Back to you, Robin.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you so much for letting me put you on the spot like that with the first question. I really do appreciate it. I wonder if anyone else has an answer to this question of kind of how do you adapt a methodology or an approach to cater for countries at different levels of development. I don't know whether any of our other panelists want to chime in on this. Alice Siragusa, perhaps. I know you were, someone had also asked the question, you know, can one use the same methodology for very small cities? Are there any small cities doing local reviews? What does this mean? Do you have any thoughts on this? How do we adapt our approach, both for different levels of development, but also for scale? Clearly, we had the governor of Pará, which is, as I said, you know, the population size of Switzerland can't be the same. You know, you can't take the same approach when you're looking at a territory this size as when you're looking at a small or medium-sized city. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there are a couple of reflections, I think, to put on the table. The first is that the agenda has been agreed to be global. So every goal can be is of interest of any country. But of course, countries have different starting situation, let's say, both in terms of implementation and in terms of achievement or strategies. Also, another point, but at the same time, so maybe some targets might be going into the specific, some targets can be less relevant for certain countries than others. There is also an issue of priorities, but we cannot forget the agenda should be addressed with a coherent and global approach, let's say, holistic approach. The second reflection is that there is an issue also of that we should keep in mind of competencies and multi-level governance. Of course, in many countries, cities have not the ability to specifically address specific targets because they belong to, for example, industrial policies that a city might not have the powers to intervene upon. So there are several reflections. I think that regionally, speaking about Europe, for example, we can look at some specific contexts. So I will recommend, I know that we have a global audience today, I will recommend for the newcomers in this group to have a look also at the effort of regional organization that already tackled the issue, for example, Asian cities. I know that the Economic Commission for Asia just released some guidelines for the engagement of local authorities in Asia. Of course, the approach is an adaptation to the Asian context. So I will recommend to have a look at it, keeping in mind that we should look at the agenda in an holistic way.
Thanks, Alice. And this holistic way is really to be emphasized. I don't know if any other of our other panelists wish to comment on these or respond to these questions. Sana Maria is waving. Please, Sana Maria, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that the cities who have been part of the voluntary local review movement have been very aware of the fact that there might be situations where the national government is not either supportive of Agenda 2030 or are not able to deliver a review or partner in any kind of meaningful way with the cities. And I think that in those cases, it's even more meaningful for the cities to really take the lead and do what they can in order to be able to realize the Agenda 2030 in those places. I think it's really important to remember that sometimes a city can be a vehicle in a situation where the national government is not able to be as supportive as we would like them to be.
Henry, while I have you here, I want to throw another question at you, which is, what kinds of institutional mechanisms have you been using to foster this multi-level dialogue? So how, for example, do you work with national government very concretely?
It's a really, really hands-on concrete team effort. So it's much more about sharing information, doing workshops together, just really finding that common framework instead of any kind of political or strategy level agreement or framework. So it's really about the teams creating the reviews. It's a long process. They work very closely together. The national review team also works very closely with some of the local universities, with corporations and NGOs. So they have a very good take on how to deliver close collaboration on their way to the VNR. I think in our case, it was also meaningful that we have other cities in Finland who have done the VLR. So it's been like a collaborative effort between the VLR cities and the national government when they were delivering their second VNR. So it's really hands-on pragmatic work.
Great. Can I put you on the spot, Sana Maria, with one more question? I'm really sorry to do this. We had a question in the Q&A, and I'm going to ask the same question to another distinguished speaker, so everyone has time to get ready. Should these reviews be mandatory?
I don't think so. I think the work for Agenda 2030 should be mandatory, but I don't think a review should be. I mean, we have to be aware. We worked with several cities who start from nothing. Like their biggest struggle is how to even get the data or information or small resources together so that they're able to do something. And I think every city and every nation should first and foremost concentrate on getting the work done. And then obviously the review is tremendously helpful. But I think, you know, if you only have very little to go by, you should really definitely concentrate on the work instead of reviewing the work. That's my opinion.
What a diplomatic response. I'm going to go, if you will, to ask another diplomat for his thoughts on this. Mr. Riedland, voluntary national reviews, voluntary local reviews, why aren't they mandatory? Should they be mandatory?
That's a good question. Of course, the whole agenda is a voluntary thing, and so it kind of springs out of that. I think the VLR has a great value because it is kind of at that level you can communicate that the 2030 agenda and the SDGs is not an add-on. It's not an add-on. It is not something that you just use to wash what you already are doing. You are actually turning around and saying the SDGs should be proofing what you are doing. And I think that is where I hear also Sana Maria speaking from Finland, you know, how they are using the SDGs to kind of form the basis for what they are planning to do locally. And I think if you want a really good VNR, I think the VLR can be an excellent tool. We have seen in Norway now, in several counties and regions, we have seen a strong commitment to look into how the SDGs can reformat our thinking about societal problems of all time. And I think that's an excellent way to do it. I'm not very much a fan of mandatory things at that level. I think it must spring out of the local democracy. Thank you.
Very good, and thank you, again for these insights. I wonder if I might turn to Verena, actually, if you don't mind, in Bonn. I'm just curious. I mean, the slides that you showed us show really a very rich but also in-depth process, and I wonder if you could give us a sense for how long this process takes and what the time commitment, what the investment is. How much goes into this, Verena?
Well, I think it is a lengthy process. Inge Hemmert-Rüdland also showed how much it took to bring people on board, the communication, first of all, and it is still an ongoing process. I mean, it took us 2.5 years to develop the sustainability strategy with all departments from the city administration, with politicians, but also with civil society, businesses, science, academia. So there was a lot of involvement in this, and that is of course a lengthy process. We are now at the stage where we more combine indicator-based reporting with political strategies. But we are also looking into still communicating it, having an out role within the city, and we see that this is an ongoing process, that more people coming on board. We now, for instance, in the steering committee for this sustainability agenda, also the municipal enterprises are part of it, which weren't before. So the rollout is still ongoing, and I think it's a lengthy process really to get a lot of involvement and to bring more people on board, which was mentioned before in other contributions as well.
Thanks so much, Verena. This is a really important point, that it's not, you don't just come up with the approach and then implement it. It's growing over time. So you can actually start with something presumably smaller, and you can build and bring others in and expand. And I think this is probably a very important aspect. For our colleague, there was one colleague had asked about, well, what do you do if you're a small city? Clearly, you don't have the resource. You're not able to invest perhaps in convening these stakeholders, in engaging national government in the way that cities such as Bonn are, if you're a smaller entity. But I think this point on starting somewhere and then building it up, there's no sort of fixed endpoint where you suddenly say, well, that's it, our VLR is done. I think that's a really important message. I don't see any more questions in there, other than that we are going to find a way of getting a couple of questions in there. The global guidelines that Mr. Trepelkov mentioned, we'll certainly find a way of getting those to colleagues. I'm sure that they're available on the UN DESA website. And I wonder if Alice might also put the link to the JRC guidelines in the chat if she has a moment, and otherwise we'll find a way of circulating those to participants afterwards. So before handing over to my colleague Stefano, who's going to wrap up, we wanted first of all to do a third Zoom poll, a third and final Zoom poll for the day. And the question is, how can all levels of government better coordinate their VLRs and VNRs? And I'm told you can select, colleagues in Paris, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm told that you can select up to 2 options should you wish to do so. So I'll just give colleagues a moment to share their views through this poll now. I see some people still voting, so we'll wait just a few more seconds. Okay, I wonder if my colleagues in Paris might tell us what the results of this are. Oh, we're divided. Good. 21% emphasize mutual engagement. 27% of you have put an emphasis on the production and sharing of local and regional data, and just over half of you have emphasized the importance of institutional mechanisms for a multi-level dialogue. The truth is there's absolutely no right response here, and this is really about helping to get a conversation going about what we want out of these processes. It's been a really rich discussion, colleagues, and I want to thank each and every one of our panelists for bringing their perspectives from across the world and from all levels of government. And special thanks to Alex Trepelkov with us here in New York for bringing the perspectives of the UN family, of the UN Secretariat on all of this. I heard many messages, many common elements here. I won't try and sum them all up. But I'll say that, we heard everyone putting an emphasis on the importance of communication. And I think this point on, that Mr. Ridland made about, reviews aren't just about a report. They're really about a process. They're really a way of engaging. And I think this is something that came out very clearly in all of the interventions that we heard today. Each of you spoke of the importance of evidence, and that's something that it's almost our currency at the OECD. If you can't count or measure something, what are you going to do about it? And I think that each of you has shown how at different levels of government and also in different resource environments, these review processes have helped to bring evidence to bear on both the progress and challenges made in your respective communities. And that's extremely important. Several of you spoke of the importance of these subnational processes in looking at inequalities. And it's true that when you look at these dashboards with 193 countries, you think, wow, huge inequalities between countries. But what a lot of our speakers today are doing and what their work really helps us get a handle on is where are the disparities in progress within countries and within communities, and they're extremely important in our, I think, global effort to leave no one behind. And I think that maybe the final reaction or reflection that I had was that you can engage in this process at a whole number of levels and at a whole number of scales. You can be a state in a large and populous country such as Brazil, or you can be a very small city, and there is still a space for you, there is still a room for you to play a vital role in connecting local implementation with national efforts to take stock, and with this very global process to keep momentum, to share lessons. Shouldn't be mandatory, but the work should be mandatory, one of our panelists said. So great to keep the momentum going. I'm going to hand over now. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. It's been a real honor. It's been a real privilege for me here in New York. I'm going to hand back now to a face that will be familiar to you. Stefano Mata is the coordinator of the OECD's program on a territorial approach to the SDGs. He's the main architect of our program, and I hand over to Stefano to wrap up the discussion to conclude our first day, and perhaps tell us what we're all doing tomorrow in the second day of this meeting. Thank you so much. Over to you, Stefano.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you very much, everybody, for this exciting first day of the roundtable. I think a good way to try to summarize a bit some of the key messages of the discussion today in 3 minutes is to use our checklist. If you go to next slide, Alina, is the checklist that we produce to guide cities, regions, and national government in implementing a territorial approach to the SDGs. And this is very much based on the policy dialogue that we had with the 9 pilot cities and regions. And in particular, it was co-designed with all the participants, most of you will remember, in Bonn during the second roundtable. And the checklist is based on 5 key pillars. One is on using the SDGs to design strategies, policy, and plans. And we heard today how Viken, Southern Denmark, Flanders did to design their own local regional development strategy in particular, but many other cities are doing the same, Bonn and so on. Then the second pillar, and I will focus a bit more on this, is on the multi-level governance, and it is strongly linked to the discussion that we just had on VNR and VLR. When we started this project, the VLR movement was not so popular at that time, but one of the key recommendations of the work was to first, for the national government, that are our main constituencies, to include more and more cities and regions in the VNR process and use the VNR process as a tool to improve multi-level governance for the SDGs in a specific country. But at the same time, one of the recommendations for the few cities that at that time did the VLR, like Kitakyushu, that was one of the pilot, or Bonn that was started thinking about the VLR, was to use the process of the VLR also to engage the national government. And what we did is also to produce some evidence. By Robin, data are key for VNR and VLR processes. We produced an OECD localized indicator framework to help a national government in particular to capture and to measure this within country disparities that Robin was mentioning also. So the idea is really to go beyond national average when measuring progress on the SDGs. The other three key blocks are financing and budgeting. So we are seeing really how cities and regions are including the SDGs in their budgeting, data and information already mentioned, and the important role of engaging stakeholders. So what is going to happen next? Tomorrow first, but as OECD in this project, we will continue. The focus of the second phase of the program will be very much in implementing this checklist and further developing this checklist with new pilots that are joining our project. We will focus also on a specific dimension that is related also to multi-level governance, is city-to-city cooperation. We are just starting a new project with the European Commission DigiDevCo on city-to-city cooperation can help to localize the SDGs, city in OECD countries with city in developing countries. And then to connect to the topic of tomorrow, we will strengthen our work on the SDGs as a framework to help cities and regions to recover from COVID. This will be the focus of the roundtable tomorrow. To have a keynote speech by Jeffrey Sachs. So please don't miss this a great event. We will have Aziza presenting the work that we have been doing so far on how cities and regions responding to COVID in the short term first, but now more and more in the long term. So again, thank you very much to all the 350 and plus participants that attended today. Thank you very much to all the speakers, and looking forward to the discussion tomorrow at 12, again, from 12 to 3 p.m. Paris time. Please see you tomorrow, and I think we can close the webinar now. Thank you very much to everybody.